Hey everybody, and welcome to another video from the Electronic Armory. In the last video, we showed you how to not only open a door by entering a trigger volume, but limiting that opening effect to knocking over a table into that volume in order to open up that wall. So in this video, we're going to actually show you how to do a camera shake. So as that wall is moving in the Z direction, up 300 centimeters, we're going to shake the camera just to give it an effect of kind of like an earthquake happening. And this is a pretty easy effect, and it adds a whole lot of polish to your games. So let's get started with that. In our blueprints folder, we obviously have our automatic wall blueprint that we set up in here. And if you're not familiar with that, do watch the previous videos. But I'm going to right click in this menu here and go up to blueprint class, because we're going to create a new blueprint class to control our camera. And we have a whole bunch of objects here that we can inherit from that we've talked about in previous videos. But under all classes, what I'm going to do is type in shake under here, and it'll give us a couple options. And we're interested in the camera shake blueprint. So we're going to inherit or copy this into a child class blueprint. And I'm simply going to call this wall camera shake and then underscore BP. And this is going to set up our blueprint for this. So I'm going to double click on this to open up its blueprint editor. And the items that we're interested in are right here on the right, already set up for us. So a couple of things. First is oscillation duration. What's the duration, or how long does this camera shake happen? And if you remember in the previous video, we set up our wall to get raised from 0 to 300 centimeters over a time of 4 seconds. So that's what we want to have correspond to our camera shake. And these are all hard-coded values. You might want to set up some kind of globally acceptable or accessible variable that defines this somewhere, just to, if you change it to 4.5 seconds, that everything matches up. The next thing we're interested in is the location of the oscillation, so the back and forth or up and down movement of the camera. And so we have an X, Y, and Z coordinate system. And by the way, if you don't see these, you can just hit these disclosure arrows to disclose or hide the settings underneath it. So make sure all these are open, X, Y, and Z. And the settings under each one of these are amplitude and frequency. The amplitude is going to be how much of the movement is in the X direction. And so we could do something like, let's say 15, and then the frequency. So how often does that happen over the duration? And so maybe an earthquake, at least, what you see in Hollywood and that sorts of things, kind of doesn't go very far. The camera doesn't move back and forth to the left and the right very far. It kind of just stays in the middle and shakes back and forth, right? But very frequently. So let's set this frequency up to maybe 60 for this value. And again, this is just the X coordinate system. This is our Y. And so we're going to type in pretty similar values. Maybe it doesn't move up so much, so maybe 10. The frequency is maybe a little bit less. The Z is going to be the forward and backwards motion of the camera. And maybe this has a smaller value of 5, but it happens much more frequency, more like a vibration. The vibration happens a lot more frequent. So I don't know, let's just type in 80. Now let's test out those values. So I'm going to save that first, compile. And so this wall camera shake, we want to trigger or play that animation or that shake when the wall gets moved up, and that happens in our automatic wall blueprint that we created before. So let's open that up and kind of remind you what's going on here. It is first testing to make sure that it is some kind of static mesh actor of some sort, and then it's going to move our wall component up. We can organize this a little bit because this gets a little bit messy with adding new nodes. I'm just going to select these 2 nodes by clicking and dragging. Right click on any one of these, and at the bottom of this menu that pops up, click on Create Custom Selection, or Create Comment from Selection. And that'll kind of wrap this in one big comment block, and we can just say move wall up, or just move wall. This might not be in the up direction depending upon how dynamic you want to make it. So by clicking on that comment and dragging it around, we don't have to select both of those nodes. That becomes very handy once we have more nodes in our blueprints. Okay, so once we've determined that we do want to move our wall, we want to activate that camera shake. Okay, so what we're going to do is if this object is indeed a static mesh actor, I'm going to actually alt click to deselect that, or just get rid of that whole execution line there. And I'm going to right click because what we're going to need to do is get a reference to our camera manager. This is going to be the manager that holds all of the cameras in our scene. A lot of games only have one camera, especially if you're in first person mode, but you may have other cameras in the scene, especially if that game allows you to go from first person to third person to, maybe there's a cutscene that has other cameras. So our camera manager is going to hold references to all of our cameras. So if we type in get camera, and it should just come up as get player camera manager. And we only have one camera in our scene, but we may have other players that have cameras, and so we're just going to select the 0 with the first item. And the return value for that one is going to be our camera. We can drag off the return value of that camera that gets returned from this function and just say play camera shake. So you can either just type in shake or play camera. There's play camera animation if we create those, but again, this is the one we want, play camera shake. So let me just clean this up a little bit, drag these up here. Okay, so we get the camera that our player is using, and we're going to tell it to play the camera shake after a successful activation of our wall. And then the first parameter in here, actually the second one, since it's what's the camera to shake, it's going to say what's the blueprint that we're going to use to shake. So if we drop this one down, we have all our camera shakes in there. The one I named was wall camera shake underscore BP, so I know that one is mine. So select that one. And then finally, once that camera starts to shake, what happens next? Well, we want to move the wall, and these will pretty much happen what'll seem like at the same time, so we don't really have to worry too much about the order of execution on these. Some of the nodes that you do, for instance, if we tried to put this camera shake after our move component 2, the wall will move all the way up, and then we have a completed exec pin here that will get executed when and only after our object moves, and that's not what we want. So save this, compile, switch back to our level editor, and let's go ahead and test our shake camera. Let's hit play. And again, if you remember, our player does not activate that trigger, though we do have some debug statements out there, but our table does. So let's go ahead and shake our camera. Whoa, all right. So this looks pretty good. Maybe a little bit too much in the amplitude, and you can certainly reduce that and play around with it. The other thing is, if I move this actor, this static mesh actor out, and then I move it back in, we have a little bit of a bug. That I move it back in, it gets triggered. Our wall doesn't move up because our move component 2 doesn't get triggered again unless we want it to, but what'll happen is that camera shake will just get activated over and over again. So let me show you how to fix that, because it's a pretty common issue with activating some of these events. Let's go back to our blueprint. And what we're going to want to do is, if our wall is already open, or our door, whatever you want to call it, we want to set a variable, a Boolean that says true or false. Is our wall door already open? Yes, it is. Therefore, don't play the camera shake or any of this other stuff. No, it's not. Go ahead and edit all this stuff. And the way that we do that is, if right here on right before even we try to cast it, we're going to test out our variable. And so I'm going to give us a little bit of room. So click and highlight all those and move that just about there. So we're going to want to keep track of the state of our wall. Now we could ask it if it's, where its position is, and if it's at 300, then we know it's open. But that's not foolproof, because if we enter the volume again when the wall is halfway up, then it'll get triggered because it's not all the way at 300. You can do a greater than 0, but that's just getting complicated. So again, we're just going to create a state in here, and we're going to do that by adding a variable. So click on this add variable in our blueprint, and we're going to say is wall open, or just simply is open, or whatever you want to do that. And by sometimes it'll come up as a Boolean. If yours comes up as a trigger volume, because sometimes that's the last variable that we created, just go ahead and select it and make sure that Boolean is selected from the variable types. And by default, we can't set the default value yet because we haven't compiled it. So let's go ahead and compile, and that should update our default value here. So is wall open? Checking it means true. Well, we're going to start it out at the state of false, so that default value is actually acceptable to us. When this trigger gets overlapped, I want to set this variable, this Boolean, to true, meaning yes, the wall is open. So therefore, don't trigger it again. So the way that we do that is we're just going. Actually, the easiest way is to drag this Boolean into our scene, somewhere in the middle, release it. And we're going to say, we'll immediately set it to true. So I'm going to select the set option. And is wall open? Yes, we're going to set that to true. So make sure that checkbox is now checked. And we're going to change this path of execution here and set it to true and set it to the cast. And then that should go through. Now, we haven't exactly changed any of the flow. There's still no check to see if this has been set yet. So what we can do is we can move this over, and then we'll just do I just want to show you this capability just in case you have other needs. But I'm going to right click, and you can type in either branch or if, because we want to create an if statement or if else statement, but it's called branch in Blueprint. We want to branch off execution. So I'm just going to hook this up to our exec pin. And so if a particular condition is true, then this pin will get executed. If that condition is false, this pin will get executed. So our condition is our wall open? Well, again, if our wall is not open, so false, go ahead and set it to true and then open it. If it is already open, so if this condition, if our wall is open, or if it's true, excuse me, then we're not going to open it. Instead, I'm just going to print out a string. So I'm just going to type in print, and let's just say wall is already open. Okay, so I'm going to move that up. And we haven't filled it in our condition yet. So let's make that dynamic and drag in our wall. But instead of set, we're going to do a get. So we're going to get the value of this Boolean. And we're going to pipe this in right into our condition to make that dynamic. So let's review what our logic looks like real quick. When our trigger volume is overlapped and our wall is not open, so false, set the wall to open so that when we come back through, this is always true and just goes to there. If it's true, get the actor that has overlapped our trigger volume. And actually, now that I think about it, if our player comes into contact with it, then this actually does get executed, and then we couldn't do that. So I actually want to do that after this, which is a good thing we reviewed this. So I'm just going to simply move that over there and move this down here. This is going to get a little messy, but it's there. And just simply hook that up to there and that up to there. Okay, so sorry about that. So we want to make sure that we only set our wall open once we're ensured that our table has overlapped that trigger. Okay, so once we do that, we set the variable to isOpen so that we'll come back in here. If the table overlaps it again, it'll say, nope, our wall is open. That's true, and then it gets stuck in there. Next, we get our player camera. We shake it at the same time, or just quickly right after that, we say move wall up. Okay, so enough explanation. Let's go ahead and play this and test out to see if our bug is now fixed. So let's see Whoops. Okay, so we have an error in our code there. Oh, okay. Our pin. This is usually why I disconnect pins before just dragging them out, because actually this pin got caught these two nodes, and that's not what we wanted. So I'm going to select that one to break it and then go under there. It's always good to recheck your pins, and again, that's why I disconnect pins, because sometimes when you drag them, it doesn't always replace them with what you think. But this is why we play test so often. All right, so player, yep, that's fine. Player doesn't trigger it. And then when we hit our table in here, we have a little earthquake. The next thing is our table goes out. Oops, I really knocked that table away, but let's knock it back in. And it says wall is already open. Perfect. So that's exactly what we wanted to have handled. So I hope you found this video useful. In the next video, we'll continue along with our series in 3D game development using Unreal and Blender. And if you like this content, hit like. If you want to see more of it, hit the subscribe button, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks.